Spring ball is nigh upon us. What's the most important thing the Oklahoma Sooners have to accomplish this spring? We'll talk about it here on today's episode of Locked On Sooners.
You are Locked On Sooners, your daily podcast on the Oklahoma Sooners, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Sooner Nation? Welcome to Locked On Sooners, and thank you for making Locked On Sooners your first listen every single day. We're free and available on all podcast platforms and on YouTube. Hit that subscribe button and that notification bell to let you know when new episodes drop. My name is John Williams. You can follow me on Twitter at John9Williams. My buddy here is Josh Helmer. You can follow him on Twitter at JoshOnRef. You can also follow the show on Twitter at Locked On Sooners. And Josh, we got spring ball coming up. First practice is Monday afternoon, evening. So if you're watching this, we're recording this Sunday night. We'll cover spring ball all spring long through the culmination of the spring game to get you ready for the 2023 football season. But Josh, getting us started here, what's the biggest question mark the Oklahoma Sooners are facing as they start spring ball?
I think the biggest question mark that Oklahoma's facing, and you've probably, if you're a regular listener, heard me say this a lot, but I'll say it again. The biggest question mark Oklahoma is facing is super big picture, but how much can this defense improve between now and the time we kick off 2023? It's the clear, you are the weakest link. Goodbye. And Oklahoma needs to get that corrected before we start off 2023. So that's not, defensively position specific. I look across the board for Oklahoma, and whether it's defensive line, if you want to talk edge guys, defensive tackles, linebackers, inside backer, outside backer, cheetah, safety, corner. I mean, everybody collectively can improve defensively for Oklahoma. So that's the biggest question mark, is how much growth, how much progress is going to have happened between the end of last season to the beginning of this second year in the Venables era.
Yeah, and one thing I'll be curious to see is, and we won't know this really until the fall, but what they're doing to address the third down woes, the red zone inefficiency, things of that nature, because that was the biggest issue that faced the Oklahoma Sooners offense. Yeah, they averaged 35 points per game last year, but it could have been so much better if they were a little bit more efficient on third down, a little bit more efficient in the red zone. It could have been better, which is kind of crazy to think that this was a team that averaged 35 points per game, missed their starting quarterback for a game and a half, and they were still pretty good. And they could have been a little bit better in certain areas. Obviously, they could have been better in certain areas. They went 6-7, but I think you look at a 6-7 team and you think, okay, they can improve everywhere. You spoke to the defensive side of the football, but I do think that offensively, there's a lot of room for improvement as well. And I'll be curious to see how that transpires, especially having lost so many guys. You lose your starting offensive tackles. You lose your starting right guard. You lose your 1,000-yard wide receiver, your 1,000-yard rusher. Andrew Rame, I mean, how healthy is he going to be for the first day of spring? Is it going to be Nate Anderson, Joshua Bates? Are they going to be getting a lot of these reps early on? Are they going to factor into the position battle? Are they going to create a competition at center? So there are a lot of question marks on the offense. Kind of similarly, to the defense a year ago, they lost so much NFL talent. They had a big transition year. Is the offense going to be able to kind of have a different outcome than what the defense showed us in 2022 after losing all of that talent? I think they'll be good, and I think the offense is going to be just fine. But will we see some of the same issues because they lost Eric Gray, they lost Marvin Mims, and two offensive tackles that'll probably go in the top 100 of the draft?
Well, and I think as we start talking just the spring itself, what do you want to get out of it? What do you need to get out of it? John, if you want to toss this into the biggest question marks, I think you could spin it in a way to make it just that. I mean, one of the biggest pieces of the puzzle, I think, for me, and probably this is the case just about every spring season, right? The guys you're replacing, how does that progression go away from guys that were big production guys for you into, new players that will be in those roles. But to me, it is the biggest question mark for Oklahoma, or the number one thing they got to get accomplished this spring, John, is, okay, there's a lot of newcomers. Some of those via the transfer portal. Some of those are freshmen. So how do those newcomers come along? How quickly does all of that progress for Oklahoma? And I think I told you this before we started taping tonight, John. To me, which newcomer are we going to hear first about? Peyton Bowen. We heard Brent Venables. I don't think it was, I think it was maybe a little bit intentional that when you had the day where you had all of the Sooners there and it's, hey, come talk to every new Sooner newcomer that's already on campus. And Brent Venables in his press conference that day said football's easy for Peyton Bowen. So that raises my antenna. It sounds the positive alarm bells for me a little bit that, okay, maybe Peyton Bowen is going to be the newcomer we start hearing the most buzz about throughout the spring, because I'll take you back just a little bit to last year, John. And I know that probably this statement will hinge upon what happens this season with Jaren Kanak, but Kanak was a guy that, whether it was media prompted to a degree, because of course he had the storyline coming to Oklahoma where he was coming to OU regardless, right? Everybody, by now you know the story. I'm going where Brent Venables is going to be at, but so the media wanted to know more about Jaren Kanak, but the staff itself, John, made a clear point that this guy physically was ahead of where everybody else was at in the weight room for this freshman class. So I'll be curious in the spring, whether it's a McCullough, whether it's a Bowen, whether it's an Adibare, which of these freshmen, which of these newcomers from the transfer portal, who do we start hearing that buzz about the quickest? Because to me, that's an obvious telltale sign. Okay, if not even as soon as 2023, then 2024. I mean, this is someone that the staff feels can impact things for Oklahoma.
Yeah, and for me, it'll be important to start hearing some of the portal guys making a significant impact. You brought in a lot of guys that you think can be starters on your team. They have to be, because your defense wasn't good enough a year ago. So guys like Reggie Pearson, guys like Ronald Bothroyd, Deshaun McCullough, they've got to come in and they've got to be big time players for your defense, not just role players, not just a guy that rotates in and out, but they need to be starters and they need to improve your defense, because that was the biggest issue that you faced last year. If Peyton Bowen comes in and football is easy for him at the collegiate level, then maybe he is starting next to Billy Bowman come the fall. We know he's got the range. We know he's got the athleticism. He's a 5-star player, made a ton of plays in high school. There's a bit of a step up. Can he rise to the occasion and be a big-time player? Can he make that transition easy? It's a difficult one. Even for the most gifted players, it's hard to come in and make a significant impact as a true freshman unless injuries just kind of force you into a starting role. But Brent Venables spoke very highly of him. Is it possible that part of the, hey, let's bring all these newcomers in, was to kind of light a fire under those returning guys? Like, hey, we're going to give these guys all this shine and let you know that they're here to take your jobs. So you better get to work or you're going to lose your job to somebody who wasn't on campus a year ago. It's very interesting. I mean, I just mentioned a few guys that could start for this team. You could look at Jacob Lacey. He could start. Davin Sears. He could start. Angelo Anthony. He could start. Austin Stogner. We pretty much expect him to start. Caleb Schaefer, Walter Rouse. We expect those guys to start too. It's going to take a guy that's returning, coming in and having a fantastic spring to put a wrinkle in that plan. But there are a lot of important newcomers. You mentioned Peyton Bowen. I want to hear what they have to say about Ronald Bothroyd. I want to hear where they're planning on playing him, where they project him. I mean, he's a guy that can play inside. He can play outside. He's an edge guy. He's an inside guy. He's got the size to be able to do both. But what are they going to ask him to do? Because according to everything we see online, 260. Now, if he's really a 260, 270 guy, is he a 3-tech defensive tackle, or is he a 3-man front defensive end? That'll be the thing to look into. But we've got more things to talk about as we look into spring ball. We're going to talk position battles, areas of least concerns. I'm sure Josh will have something to say about everything I just talked about here. But first, I want to talk to y'all about Built Bar. Built Bar is the best tasting protein bar ever. 100% covered in chocolate, tastes great, and it's great for you. So many great flavors. Peanut butter brownie, coconut almond are two of my favorites. The coconut brownie chunk is fantastic as well. And you can get other great products over at Built. They've got peanut butter peanut butter chocolate granola bars that are awesome. They're so, so good. And they pack a great amount of protein into those that are also low calorie, low sugar, low carb. So go check them out, built.com. Use promo code LOCK15 to get 15% off your next order over at built.com. You can also get them at Walmart or Sam's Club as well. Again, the best tasting protein bar on the market, built.com. And Josh, your thoughts, like, is it something that, okay, you bring in all these transfer guys, is it possible that all of them could end up as starters for this team, or are we just looking at maybe just a few?
Oh, I think for the most part, you look across the board of guys that they brought in from the transfer portal, and a lot of those guys are going to have a chance, to be impact guys, starters, all of that. If not starters, then somebody that's a rotational piece. Blake Smith, the tight end, all due respect, that would be kind of the one that I'm looking at and say, okay, maybe not. But literally everybody else, Lacey, Stogner, McCullough, Pearson, Ford, the punter, Elzinga, Schaefer, Bothroyd, Sears, Angel Anthony, Walter Rouse, everybody else, yes, I could see as a starting guy or a rotational piece for Oklahoma or somebody on the two deep. So, I mean, I think it was clear from Oklahoma staff, John, that they felt that they needed to do some very serious retooling once again, and they needed help. And when you're 6-7, you can't wait on help. You need help that can come in and be impactful straight away. And so Oklahoma staff made a point once again to go diving into the transfer portal once more. So yes, for all of those guys, I think there's a great chance that they're going to be starters or rotational pieces for OU.
And in that, with all these newcomers and the high school guys, the transfer portal guys, there's going to be quite a few really intriguing position battles. But what's the one that you're looking at you think is going to be the most intriguing, or the one that we may not have an answer for this spring? It's going to be something that may bleed into summer ball as well.
So because I continue to tell you and anybody that will listen here on Locked On Sooners that defensively, hey, what a no-brainer statement. Oklahoma's got to get much, much better there. The defensive tackle and edge rush positions, those are the two position battles for Oklahoma that are most important. They have to get better up front defensively, John. I don't know that, you look across the board for Oklahoma in 2022, and Eric Gray had an elite season at running back, I'd say nationally. But then beyond that, I don't know that there's one player or one position group beyond that you point to and say, okay, that was elite. But having said that, there was quite a bit of good offensively for Oklahoma, right? Braden Willis had a nice season. Offensive line, if it wasn't the Joe Moore award-winning offensive line that it's been in the past here at Oklahoma, you're going to have a couple of guys that are going to get drafted pretty highly in this 2023 NFL draft. So it was a good, if not great, offensive line for Oklahoma. So all of that being said, I mean, look, I get it. Across the board, you could pick almost any position group and say, well, that's got to be better this season for Oklahoma. But most intriguing position battles, because of the relative lack of pass rush, the final, and you and I have detailed it, I think we went back and dug into the numbers and found out that Oklahoma, if you just extrapolated the data from the Big 12 games on, Oklahoma would be somewhere in that 113 nationally in sacks per game figure. So Oklahoma, I mean, probably it's that. It's probably edge rusher where Oklahoma needs to get much, much better, though. I would also say interior defensive line. I'm watching their eagle-eyed focus as well.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to follow because you've got a lot of really intriguing edge players. I mean, you're bringing back Ethan Downs, Reggie Grimes, Marcus Stripling are still on campus. You brought in Trace Ford from Oklahoma State. You brought in Rondo Bothroyd from Wake Forest. You brought in Deshaun McCullough, who, again, they're going to project him at Cheetah, but I would be shocked if we didn't see him get some snaps on the edge at times, kind of in a Micah Parsons type role. a lofty comparison, not trying to say he's Micah Parsons of the Dallas Cowboys, but he's a guy that you can play him at traditional linebacker, give him snaps there, and then third down, second and long, those kind of situations, you can put him out on the edge, let him use his speed and athleticism to just wreak havoc. But given the fact that they do have a plethora of guys, I failed to mention R. Mason Thomas again, the dude that I keep sleeping on that's probably the most athletic and twitchiest of their edge players, and the person that you could probably just line up on any pass rush down and like, just go get the quarterback, and he's going to create a pressure because he's that quick off the line and that fast. And so maybe Deshaun McCullough just does play linebacker, does play cheetah, and that's all we see him as. But that's going to give him a lot of opportunities to rush. We did see Deshaun White rush the passer quite a bit out of that role as well. So it's huge. It's key. Everything starts with the pass rush, especially in the Big 12. When the passing games are so good, you've got to be able to get to the quarterback. Conversely, cornerback is an area that Oklahoma has to improve. Was it good at times? Yeah, it was okay. But even Woody Washington, one of Oklahoma's better cornerbacks, I feel like took a bit of a step back this past season. He didn't progress like we've seen in the past. Now, he did have to play some safety when Billy Bowman was out. But I do think they've got to improve the other side of the field opposite of Woody Washington. And that means maybe Kenai Walker, maybe Kendall Dolby, maybe Gentry Williams. Jaden Davis, you've done a lot for Oklahoma. You've played a lot of snaps. You got to take a big step this year, or we're looking at the future and we're looking to see, okay, who's going to be the guy that can provide us a significant upgrade at cornerback. It's possible maybe a guy like Makari Vickers could come in and play significant snaps either at safety or corner. He's kind of got that attitude that's like, I'm not waiting on anybody. I'm not waiting my turn. So could he come in and be the answer at cornerback? It's a very intriguing position because if they improve their coverage ability, namely at cornerback, it's going to allow the pass rush an opportunity to get home more and not have to get there in 2.5 seconds or less. You know, if the cornerbacks can lock it up a little bit, it gives the pass rush a better chance to get to the quarterback. And so to me, those are big areas, and they work in concert. Pass rush, coverage, they all work together. It's important for them both to be really, really good. One more question before we turn our attention to some other things. We'll continue to talk spring ball, Josh, but who needs to have a great spring from those guys returning from the 2022 team to really solidify themselves?
I don't know that it's to solidify himself, but because of who I think Danny Stutzman is expected to be for this team, I think one of your best players needs to have a great spring. That sets the foundation for this team. And maybe that's a little bit of low-hanging fruit here. And it's not, his position, his status on this team is not in question, but your best players need to be big-time leaders this time of the year when you're trying to dig yourself out of the hole that was 6-7 a season ago. So because of the defensive improvement that's necessary for Oklahoma and because he's the most prominent voice on the defense, I would start with Danny Stutzman. Then from, funneling out who needs to have a great spring to have a gig, I would say Ethan Downs, Reggie Grimes, R. Mason Thomas. I mean, all of those guys. R. Mason Thomas, probably even unfair to kind of lump him in with those other two. I just say that because clearly you went to the transfer portal and you got a Trace Ford and you got a Rondell Bothroyd, because whether it was inside or outside along the defensive line, Oklahoma's coaching staff said, you know what, we've got to upgrade this, and we've got to upgrade this in a hurry. And so they put you on notice, as you pointed out not too awfully long ago, that there's been some folks that have been brought in basically saying, hey, you might have a job, but you're going to have to re-audition and interview for said job. So I would say, to me, all of those guys, basically anybody on the defensive line, John, not named Isaiah Coe for me, I would say you probably need to have a great spring.
Yeah, and I think a guy like Ethan Downs, while it was kind of an up and down season, I feel like the way that he finished the season is going to kind of give him a leg up to start the spring. That if there is one of those edge guys that's returning, he's the one I feel the most confident could continue to be a starter for the team. Again, just his first year as a starter, was only a sophomore last year, continuing to grow at the collegiate level, continuing to build his game. But by the end of the season, was really coming on strong, creating a lot of splash plays in the backfield. So he's kind of the guy I'd feel most confident about that started along the defensive line that I think could be a returning starter. But I do agree that Danny Stutzman, if he's the player you think he is, he needs to take another step and become not just a really good player, but a great player, and maybe a Butkus finalist type player, or even a semifinalist type player, because that's a hard award to get into the finals for, but somebody who can really put himself on the national landscape of being one of the best linebackers in the country. They need him to take that step.
If anybody else defensively you're earmarking, I mean, to me, you could almost just about pick almost any position defensively of returning guys defensively. Key Lawrence is someone for me. I mean, Woody Washington, we talked a little bit about Woody Washington, but Key Lawrence is somebody that this time a year ago, you and I would have thought maybe could be a star on this defense. And I know that people have soured a little bit on those type of prospects for Key Lawrence, but one great spring, all of a sudden you're back in the good graces of this coaching staff. It's open business for anybody in the defensive backfield. So again, I think you could pick just about any name back there, but before we shift this to offense, because obviously there's a wide receiver that I would say definitely needs a big spring, but any other defensive names for you?
Well, I think it's interesting you mentioned Key Lawrence, because he was really, really good in the 2021 season in a limited role. You had Delaware Turner-Yell, you had Patrick Fields back there at safety, and Key Lawrence was kind of getting these rotational snaps, in the slot. He was playing a little bit of cornerback, filling in when guys were hurt, but he played pretty well. But maybe last year got a little overexposed, playing a starter's complement of snaps, with Billy Bowman and Justin Broyles. I do think that he's got talent. I just needed to see him put it together and take another step. I do think if you have him in a rotation with Bowman and Reggie Pearson and maybe Peyton Bowen, potentially he gets to put the best foot forward, not having to play as many snaps or maybe not getting overexposed. But yeah, I'm kind of, you could probably call me as one of those people that soured on him a little bit, because I felt like he just wasn't as physical as I expected him to be after what I saw in 2021. I expected him to take another step forward. And maybe it was just one of those things where the defense was learning a new defense. Everybody's trying to get their heads around what Brent Venables was trying to accomplish on defense. And he just wasn't ready or wasn't there, along with a lot of the guys. But another one is just Billy Bowman. I want to see him take another step. First year as a starter in 2022, a sophomore like Ethan Downs, like Danny Stutzman. Now it's time to take that next step and not just become a good player, but become a really good to a really great player. Start putting yourself on at least the Big 12 landscape, the national landscape. I mean, this is the time. Like, now's the time to really make yourself known. And the Oklahoma Sooners need a veteran voice on the back end, especially, this is Woody Washington's last season. So then it's going to be, okay, who are the leaders on the back end of the defense? It's got to be Billy Bowman. He's got to be that guy for Oklahoma. And I think he can be. He's got the natural athleticism. He's got the talent. He's got the skills. He's got the range. He can tackle pretty well. Now it's just time to put it all together and really take a significant step forward in 2023. Josh, we'll talk a little bit about the offensive side of the football. We're going to have more to say about Oklahoma's weekend that was on our live show on Monday night at 9 p.m. Central Time. So make sure you're tuned in for that. We'll talk softball. We'll talk basketball, gym, all kinds of stuff that went down over the weekend. But we'll talk offense heading into the spring after Josh talks to you about our friends over at FanDuel.
FanDuel Sportsbook, past the midway point of the NBA season, past the midway point on the ice over in the National Hockey League, and here and now, it's the perfect time to download the FanDuel app. It's America's #1 sportsbook. New customers, you get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. What does that mean? Well, that's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, it's secure, it's super easy to use. They'll let you bet on everything from the money line to point scores and three-pointers drained. First goal scorer, if we're talking on the ice, you name it. FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same game parlay. So don't miss your chance to get your no sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon, FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. It's easy, isn't it, offensively for Oklahoma to say Jalil Farouk, right, has to be one of the guys throughout this spring. I know that offensively, wide receivers probably outside of the two tackles that you're replacing, that's where everybody's going to say, okay, hey, there's some serious questions here for Oklahoma. And maybe even a lot of fans, John, would look at Jalil Farouk and say, well, wait a second, that's the proven goods for Oklahoma. But similar to what I said about Danny Stutzman, I would apply similar logic here to Jalil Farouk. Yes, we've seen a lot of great, seen a lot of good from Jalil Farouk. Now it's time to, throughout this spring, we need to exit the spring and the coaching staff, the fan base. Everybody needs to feel like, okay, what we've heard, what we've seen, Jalil Farouk, John, is a number one wide receiving option at OU.
Well, and if you've been listening to the show this offseason, you know where I stand on Jalil Farouk. I'm bully on his prospects in 2023. I really do think he's going to have a fantastic season. One that's not just, hey, Jalil Farouk was really good, but one that I think is going to put him on a lot of NFL scouts' radars as a top 100 prospect. As everybody looks for that next Deebo Samuel, to me, this is a guy that has that potential because of the way he runs when he has the ball in his hands. He runs hard. He runs physical. He's looking to initiate contact, and he can run a full route tree. He can run your wide receiver screens. He can run your slants. He can run your posts, your sluggos. He can run corners. I mean, he can do everything. He run 9 routes. Like, he's a really good wide receiver that can do everything. Had a few drops this past season. One game in particular that was just not good. But all in all, when you gave him opportunities, he really came through. And I do think that with the addition of Emmett Jones, a guy who has developed some really good wide receiver talent down at Texas Tech, over at Kansas, in the high school level, he's going to kind of take that next step and really put himself on a lot of people's radars. Somebody that might have seen a highlight or two in the past, they're going to see full games of him really producing. And I really do think he's going to have 1,000 total yards this year. It could be some combination of like 750 receiving yards, 300 rushing yards, something like that. I think he'll flirt with 10 total touchdowns. Because he is the one known quantity that you have returning. Yeah, you got Javonte Barnes, Gavin Sawchuk, you feel great about. Austin Stogner, you feel great about. Drake Stoops, you feel really, really good about it as well. But as far as a guy that could like take over a football game, I do think Jalil Farouk has that ability. And it's a matter of just now, okay, you're wide receiver one. Time to run with it. Time to get 100 targets or 100 touches, 120 touches, something like that, and see what you can do with it. Because he is going to be able to be that guy that really thrives in Jeff Levy's offense because he can do everything that Jeff Levy wants a wide receiver to be able to do.
I'm glad you mentioned Austin Stogner, and pencil this down for an elongated conversation tomorrow night on the Locked On Sooners live show. Are we just automatically expecting that Stogner is going to be great at Oklahoma? Because I am. I would count myself in that camp, and maybe are we a little bit ahead of schedule in that regard because we've seen him do it here in the past. Should there be a question mark or two here with Stogner, and should we toss him on this list to have a great spring? Because he wouldn't be the first name that would come to mind for me. I feel like that's pretty almost guaranteed, I think, in my mind. What you're going to get out of Stogner is going to be similar to Braden Willis, but chalk that up for let's discuss it in more detail tomorrow. The other guys offensively, John, I mean, you got to look offensive line, right, for where else Oklahoma offensively needs to have a great spring. I don't expect in any way, shape, or form, given how this is operated in the past, then Coach Bill Bedenbaugh, he's not going to be tipping his hand anytime soon. But there should be some solidifying, right, throughout the spring. I mean, and hopefully we'll hear some good things up front on that front.
Yeah, I imagine we will. And if it's anything like it was last year when he was asked about McCabe Matire, he's like, I didn't bring him in here to be a backup. We brought him in here to start. So if it's anything similar like that, Walter Rouse, Caleb Schaefer will be starting for this team. you got some really good young offensive linemen that you want to see take steps and develop and become starters for this team. But if they're going to the transfer portal to bring in guys, there's a good chance that those guys are going to end up starting in 2023.
Savion Bird, I think, is a name to watch throughout the spring. I have fallen in love with the ability of his physicality on Oklahoma's offensive line, just based on one Cheez-It Bowl. It just took a couple of snaps, but I'm all in. I'm bought in. I think that he could be a great one for Oklahoma, but I would put him again in that mix for guys up front for Oklahoma that, okay, well, we like what we saw versus Florida State, but now show me that in pass protection, you can be more dialed in there. Every little piece of the puzzle in terms of understanding the playbook, that's got to be tightened up throughout this spring. By the time we get to fall camp, somebody like Bird, or on and on and on, we could do this exercise and practice with a lot of these guys up front for Oklahoma. I mean, here's your chance. It's open season up front in a lot of these positions. So Bird, though, he's caught my attention just based on the physicality that I think we saw versus Florida State.
Well, I think there's something you can't extrapolate from that game because, Savion Bird, Aaron Parks, they got their first significant run of playing time against a really, really good Florida State defensive front. I mean, Jared Verse should be an NFL draft pick in the top 10 this season, and he played in the Cheez-It Bowl, and he's sticking around for another year at Florida State. That dude should be a top 10 pick, but he stuck around one more year. They went up against him. So it's no shame in the fact that they weren't quite ready for the level of play that they were facing, because that was a really, really good defensive front, and they're getting their first significant playing time as collegiate players in a really difficult matchup. And they held their own on the ground in the run game. They were great in the running game. Just in the passing game, they got to get better. But him, Aaron Parks, Tyler Guyton, I think they all played really well for the most part. Things that have to improve, but yeah, some really intriguing options there if your transfers aren't as good as you hope them they're going to be, or at least there's going to be a little bit more competition if you really like what you got in Bird and Parks.
5 months out from football, but man, it feels oh so close because we start spring off tomorrow. Can't wait, baby. We finally, that little football machine, we get to feed it a little bit over the next month or so. Going to be a blast.
It's going to be fantastic. We'll have some reaction to what Brent Venables has to say in his first spring press conference. And I'm sure there'll be some nuggets tossed around from those who attend practice as well that we'll talk about. But that's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Sooners. Make sure you subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. Again, we're free and available on all podcast platforms and on YouTube. Check out the show over there. Subscribe, hit that notification bell to let you know when new episodes drop. Follow the show on Twitter at Locked On Sooners and on Facebook, Locked On Sooners Podcast. Follow Josh at Josh on Ref and myself at John 9 Williams. But until next time, he's Josh Helmer. I'm John Williams. Boomer Sooner.